Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's slow stitching video, I'm going to show how I stitch with a found object. Except, I'm going to show you how I make that found object. I love feathers, and I think feathers are just a beautiful element in nature. Sometimes I can't really find a feather, or I want to preserve my feathers in other ways, but I still want to use a feather in my slow stitching. So I'm going to create one today using a piece of felt. I use a craft store piece of felt, but you can use wool felt just as easily. In fact, you'll get a better result. But the craft store felt provides a nice base for your feather. One of the nice things about making your own feather is that you can coordinate the colors to your project, or you can make them complementary or completely contrasting. It's totally up to you. And you could also add some whimsical elements like some French knots or different stitches that clearly aren't found in a feather. So here's my process for not only making the feather, but then adding it to my slow stitching fabric book page. I like to use found objects in my slow stitching. I've already done a video showing using a leaf, and the leaf disintegrates. So I like to use feathers as well. And here's just an idea. I haven't stitched down the feather. Instead of using the actual feather, I wanted to make an alternative in case I couldn't find a feather. So here are the real feathers, but sometimes I might not want to use them in my work. So I have ones that I just painted that are wooden, and ones that I made that are paper mache. But today we're going to make ones out of felt. And this is interesting because there's so many different ways you can choose the colors and patterns on your feathers. So now I like to use felt. You can use wool felt, this is nice and thick, craft felt, just from the craft store, or a blend. This is some wool in it. The more wool it has in it, the more durable and more dense, more densely packed your felt is. But you can use any of these quite nicely. In today's video, we're going to use this green craft felt. Now I've already cut one out of the wool blend here, and I just want to show you my process for designing the shape. Here I did another one out of the wool felt, and because it's so much thicker, it's really quite stiff. I choose my felt, no matter what size I want to use, and that dictates the size of the feather. So my feather is going to be just as tall as this piece of felt. And then I just make a long oval. If you want to have your feather bend to one direction, you can do that here. And it's just a really rough size. Now, I like to have little notches in my feather just to make it look realistic. You don't have to do that, but if you want to, it adds a realistic touch. And now I'll begin to cut it. I cut the long stem, and then I cut all the way around my shape. If it's too perfect, or if I want to change the shape, now's a good time. But I like the way this is starting to look, and it's really a simple shape. So I have my feather, my negative image. Now I want to start making it look a little realistic. So feathers come in all formations, so there's no one template. This one's a little smoother, it has one major notch and a long stem. This one's more chaotic, so really anything goes. I'm going to take this one and just start to cut out my notches. And the way I like to do that is I like to just make all my cuts going in one direction for the notches first. I'll do it over here as well. And I just trim the feather down just a little, and then I can come in here and just match that notch up. I like to have those notches come out to the point so it actually replicates a feather. And you can do as many of these or as few of these as you like. But that's the general idea on how to make it look like a feather. Now once I have that shape cut, I just want to trim it a little. I know that at the top of the feather, it's going to be narrower no matter what I do. So I'll just come in here and fine tune it a little. I can even make that top come to more of a point or more of a tapered edge. And I can just continue to play with the shape until I have a feather that I like. And I'm quite pleased with this one. Now I'm ready to start stitching. Now you can stitch directly on the feather, or you can stitch it onto your piece at this point. It's totally up to you. Before I begin my stitching, I like to make just a light little sketch of that stem. I start mostly at the top, maybe just a little half an inch or so down, and I bring it right to the base. Now this one's too straight for me, so I want to come in here and change it and just give it a little bit of an arc. I can take a piece of cording here, this is just a piece of yarn, and use it to stitch over with a couching stitch to get a little dimension, just like I have done here for the center, but it's not necessary. I can just make any type of stitch as well, and I've done that here and here. So I'm going to come in with a gold color here, just a little bit of a beige color, and I'm going to start right at the top, and I like to have most of my knots, if possible, right in the center of my feather. So even if I'm stitching on up the sides and down the sides, I like to start my stitch in the center. And that way when I stitch it down, it gives the feather a little dimension, but it also makes it so I don't see my threads. And now I can just choose any type of stitch to make. And I'm going to do the split stitch. So I stitch down, and then I come up in between that stitch, and I continue with that line, following the guide that I have here that I made. And I just continue to come up through that stitch each time. This makes a nice stitch with a nice curve right to that stem. And I'll do this the length of this feather. Now I use felt for the feather. It doesn't fray. It's very easy to acquire, and it comes in lots of colors. But you can try this with fabric. It might fray on the edges, and depending on the look you're going for, that might be very desirable. It would look like one of those feathers that's kind of a little haywire. So once I've completely stitched right down the stem, I can decide how far I want to go down. I usually go right to the very edge, and I like to make sure that I have a little thread left over so that when I do stitch my feather down to my project, I have a little of this same color thread that I can use to match it right to the piece. I'll just finish my last few stitches. Come right up here through that stitch. And again, I chose this stitch because it makes a nice smooth curve. So now I'm pretty much done with that stitch for now. There's a little piece left over here, and I'm just going to save that to stitch over when I attach my feather to my final piece. But as I was saying, I want all my knots to go in the center. So I'm just going to flip my feather over and gently take my thread and just stitch through some of these stitches on the back, and this will hide my thread that's on the back of my feather so it's not poking forward, and I just bring it up so that I can make the knot just a little ways up this feather, and this way it's not seen from the front of the feather. So I'll save this thread to use when I tack my feather down. Now I can continue to make little hairs from the feather all the way up using whatever color thread I want. And I have different colors here. I can create a very simple design with just a few little strands, or I can really create a very busy design. I take a different color thread, and I like to start right over here. I can start right in the center, and I'm going to stitch a line with a little bit of an arc right to the edge, and I'll do this on both sides. Now for this stitch, you can use the same stitch or you can use a different stitch. I'm going to continue with this split stitch all the way today, just on this feather. I like the way that looks, but for more texture, I could use a back stitch or just a straight stitch or even a stem stitch. And again, I can decide exactly how far up the feather I want to go. Now once I have my line stitched, I'm going to come back in and just work my way down with my thread to the center of that feather. I'm not going to pull too tight, but I'm just trying to work my thread away from the edge so that when it's flipped over, nothing's sticking out. I can come down here and start the same thing again, making my stitch all the way to the edge of this feather. And again, once I have it to the edge, I'll work my way down through the back of the feather, through those stitches, just to keep that floss away from poking out on this side. I'll do a little more work, creating more little stitches here, and then we'll take a look at our work and add it to our finished piece. So I finished stitching all the lines onto my feather, all the little hairs, and I'm pretty pleased with the way it looks. I'm now ready to stitch it to my book page. Here I have a book page, and I already sewed on my fabric collage. I chose the burlap and the lace because I like the contrast between the rough and the delicate, but I chose the burlap because it reminds me of the forest floor with all the pine needles on it. It just looks very rustic to me, and I love the texture. I also took a piece of muslin and put it down just so I'd have a backing for my feather, and it really shows up. I have this little word that I printed out, and I want to attach that as well to this page, just like this. So I'll start by stitching down that feather. I have just some of that embroidery floss in that color that we used for the shaft of the feather. And now I just want to stitch it down. So I'll just pin it in place exactly where I want it. And then with my thread on my needle, just some embroidery floss, all 6 strands, I'm going to start continuing that line down from the shaft. So when we stitched that line originally, we came up right to the end. There's a little bit of the feather remaining. So I'm just going to stitch over that. I'm just going to continue that and stitch it further down right to the piece. Continuing that same split stitch. And then I'll just do 2 stitches at the end just to anchor it in place. And now from here, I'm just going to go up and tack it down in a few places up that shaft. Again, going through the stitches I've already put down. Now there are many ways you can do this. You don't have to use this method. I just happen to like this method. It blends in and it attaches the feather in a way where the feather still has a little bit of movement to it. So I can remove the pin and just stitch down a few edges. This way the edges of the feather stick up. And I like that look. If you like it stitched down, by all means stitch it down. Just do a few more stitches right to the top. Again, making sure they go right in that line we've already stitched. I have this turned upside down just because it's easier to see. And I want to make sure I come up and straight down. And then over here at the very end, I'm just going to elongate it very gently with 1 stitch. I can turn it on the back, knot it right off. And then all I have left to do is to stitch down my word. So that's how I make my slow stitched faux feather. Now there's a lot of variation that you can make, including the size, the color. You can make it completely whimsical or completely realistic, and the choice is yours. Have you made a feather? What do you think? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.